Okay. So you're very welcome to this evening's FirstWeds. Thank you very much for joining us. The theme of tonight's conversation is migrant voices across Europe. The rationale of hosting the conversation tonight was to try to create some space for community and migrant-led organizations to talk about their work across Europe. First up, I'd like to thank Concern for their support and ongoing support for the FirstWeds debates. Without them, it wouldn't really happen. Also tonight, we really want to thank the International Citizens for Local Perspective project, which is a project that COLOV is working with partners in France, Slovenia, and Italy. And also I'd like to thank Tom, who's going to be facilitating tonight from the Department of International Development, Maynooth. And obviously, we'd like to gratefully thank the panel that are going to speak. Tom will introduce them shortly, but we have comrades from Infokolpa, which is an organization and project based in Ljubljana in Slovenia. We have Katja Utrosa from Palermo. Hopefully Richard's going to be joining us shortly. We have comrades from the Refugee Women's Centre in Calais in France. And last but definitely not least, our own comrades in MASI. We have Mavis here speaking from MASI, the Movement of Asylum Seekers in Ireland. If you'd like to like, share, subscribe to the channel, that'll make sure that you get the videos on an ongoing basis. And what I'm going to do later is to update the description of the video with material support, stuff like donating to the particular campaigns and projects that you're going to hear about now. I'm going to switch my camera off now and let Tom introduce our panel. If you want to ask any questions, if you drop them in the comments of the video, and I'll make sure that they get to Tom and to our panel. So yeah, thank you very much. I'm just going to pass you over to Tom.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks for generating this space for this really important debate, and for everybody who's listening at home or wherever you may be in Ireland or further afield, you're very, very welcome. Once again, just to say, I work with my own background. I work with the Department of International Development in Maynooth University, and I'm stepping in for my colleague Eilish Dillon, who sends her apologies, who was due to chair this session, but I'm more than happy to do so. So as Mark was saying, I suppose the purpose of this webinar is to provide space for grassroots migrant groups across Europe to talk about their experiences, particularly the challenges they face, as everybody knows, in light of COVID-19, and how they're organizing and responding at the moment. So we're really pleased to have a number of people with us, speakers here tonight from some really good grassroots groups who are working. Just to introduce them, I'll start with Mavis Ramazani, excuse me, Mavis, who close to home with an organization called Movement for Asylum Seekers in Ireland. Many of you in Ireland may already know them. So MASI are doing an incredible amount of work advocating on behalf of migrants and asylum seekers' rights, particularly around their campaign to end direct provision, but Mavis will tell us a bit more about that. We also have from Slovenia, we have Katja Utrosa, who works with the organization Infokolpa, which is a migrant-led project based in Ljubljana, working with asylum seekers, refugees, migrant workers, and particularly engaged in monitoring border violence, and she'll tell us more about that. We also have, very pleased to have with us, Francis, Timberlake and Alana, who work with, correct me if I'm wrong, Refugee Women's Centre, which is a mobile service working again with migrant families living without shelter in the French cities of Calais, Grand-Sainte, and in surrounding areas. So welcome, Francis and Alana. We hope to have Richard Braude maybe joining us a little bit later, who works with the Italian organization Archi Porco Rosso. Without further ado, maybe if I could just ask each of you guys to maybe just say a little bit more about the work your organizations are doing. Could I start with you, Mavis? Would you like to kick off and tell us a bit more about what you're doing?
Thank you so much, Tom, and everyone joining us live from different parts of the world. As introduced earlier on, my name is Mavis Ramazani. I am with the movement of Asylum Seekers in Ireland, and also in February this year, I joined as the Employee Engagement Officer, the Irish Refugee Council. Most of our advocacy and campaign around the situation in direct provision in Ireland, which is a system used to accommodate those who are here in Ireland to seek refuge and asylum, has been with both organizations, the Movement of Asylum Seekers in Ireland and the Irish Refugee Council. Today, briefly, I would like to share with everyone the advocacy and the campaign around the overcrowding and inability to social distance for families and children living in direct provision centers in Ireland, and also the impact of the pandemic on the of children living in direct provision. And yeah, so I'll give the other speakers an opportunity to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mavis. And we can come back and hear a little bit more about that work, important work. That's great. Maybe Francis, can I go over to you, Francis and Alana?
Yeah, hi, thank you for the introduction. So as you said, we're both working with the Refugee Women's Centre, which is a small grassroots organisation supporting migrant women and families in the informal living settlements in Calais and Dunkirk in northern France. So the majority of our work takes place in kind of small, dispersed, tented settlements amongst migrant families living rough and destitute in the area, most of whom are undocumented. We began originally as an official structure in an official camp in the area, but following the destruction of this camp and a consistent policy on the part of the state to prevent structures being rebuilt for migrants in the area, we now operate as a mobile service providing holistic support to women and families. This includes material aid, material support, so basic clothing, hygiene items, bedding, as well as casework support and psychosocial support, so the facilitation of skills building activities, of English lessons, of basic activities for women and children that we work with. And in addition to this, we take part in several advocacy projects, kind of working through extensive data collection and monitoring of vulnerabilities, pushing for longer term solutions to the situation that we see here in northern France, specifically in relation to access to accommodation and other basic rights for displaced people.
Great. Great, thanks, Francis. And we'll maybe hear a bit more about the particular challenges you're facing at the moment. Katja, do you want to fill us in a bit more maybe on the important work you guys are doing? I know you're doing a lot of work down there.
Yes, hello, I'm Katja. I represent a grassroots initiative called Infokolpa, which is active in Ljubljana, in Slovenia. It is a self-organized group made up of local people and of migrants, asylum claimants, people that got their asylum, and also people that don't have any papers. We try to offer basic support with the humanitarian aid, and then also with bureaucratic aid in communicating with the various agencies. And we also monitor the activity at the Slovenian-Croatian border, actually through the whole Balkans, from Slovenia down to Serbia, which is a place where violent chain pushbacks happen daily on a regular basis. So we do also a lot of advocacy work with this.
Kind of maybe Katja, if you allow me, maybe if I can just kind of kick off, stick with you for the moment. Could you maybe tell us a bit more how, if you think things have changed, how the whole COVID thing, how that's affected the reality for refugees and people on the move And in terms of your own work, how you've maybe responded to that, have things been different, or is it business as usual?
It is business as usual. The borders were closed in Slovenia during the pandemic, March, April. However, these pushbacks were happening the whole time, from Slovenia to Croatia and from Croatia to Bosnia and Herzegovina. So not much has changed on this border. In the asylum camps, something did change. Asylum procedures were suspended until the 1st of July. This led to overcrowding, serious overcrowding in the in the Ljubljana asylum home. So then the procedure started again, but the irony is that the borders were closed for pretty much everything except, this illegal practice of pushbacks.
Okay, so absolutely borders. And is there any kind of health monitoring in the places where the camps or where people are stationary at the moment? Is there anybody responding in terms of health needs of people on the move in those areas, or is it very limited?
No, I don't believe so. For Ljubljana, the asylum home got crowded, when crowding is something that is not supposed to happen during the pandemic. So no, I don't believe there is any real testing or monitoring of these populations.
We've heard terrible reports, of course, from the camps in Greece and Lesbos, overcrowding and particular needs there. But obviously every country is different. Yeah. Do you want to come in on that, maybe, Francis? How are things in France at the moment in terms of COVID? How has it been? Very difficult?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you brought up Greece, and I think probably a lot of the areas with high number of displaced people in informal camps have seen similar challenges during this time. So definitely, I think what characterized the kind of COVID-19 confinement here in northern France was a total lack of response from both the French and the British state at the shared border. So it's the Franco-British shared border. The risks were definitely heightened. I mean, already prior to COVID, the risks were high. I mean, there's one water tap available to 600 people in Dunkirk, one water tap available to 1,200 people in Calais. That was prior to the COVID outbreak. Very restricted access to things like showers and toilets. People are living in crowded, tented settlements outdoors. And so, as you can imagine already, the situation was pretty dire. We saw no immediate response from the French government when the national confinement or the national lockdown measures hit, which was concerning to say the least. Very little health monitoring. So there's a state mandated but volunteer kind of under-resourced organisation that was put in charge of operating a static temperature taking unit in the camps, but it's been shown to be fairly ineffective in that they have no translators, have identified very few cases of COVID, which we don't think is due to there being no cases of COVID, but simply to them not being identified, since the transmission risks are so high. I think on a wider policy level, it's probably highlighted the kind of long-term governmental or intentional governmental neglect of displaced people in northern France, which is an intentional policy that we've seen on the part of both French and British governments as part of a kind of dissuasion tactic to try and avoid people or try to dissuade people from arriving in the area and attempting the crossing to the UK, which is why most people are here. So yeah, all in all, kind of vast denial of basic rights, and I think just a highlighting of the overarching policy that's governed the area, prior to COVID-19, but has definitely, true colours have been shown during this period, I guess.
Wow, yeah, and I understand, I mean, in some cases, it's been used as an excuse to kind of break up settlements and things, you know, that violence was stepped up in some cases. I don't know if that was true or...
Yeah, absolutely. So in the first month of the lockdown, which was back in March here in northern France, in Calais, there was a specific police mission deployed that was using like excessive use of force. So tear gassing of minors, beatings of adults and minors, quite violent destruction of camps, so of people's belongings, of people's living spaces. Yeah, so there's definitely been a big crackdown, and it's, I think, a lot of the discourse that's probably seen across Europe around, you know, migrants or displaced communities posing a bigger threat to the national population. So kind of, I guess, using the excuse to create further divisions between the kind of protected and the threat, which has, yeah, definitely been present here in northern France.
Mavis, maybe if I could come back to you and just ask if you could tell us maybe how the particular challenges have been for maybe asylum seekers in Ireland, particularly those who we know are living in direct provision, which is difficult enough as it is. Has it been exacerbated?
Yeah, it has during this pandemic. Direct provision has been in crisis for many years, and the last 2 years in particular, there's been a rapid increase in emergency accommodation centers. Currently, more than 1,500 people are accommodated in hotels. And one of the challenges has been in overcrowding and inability to social distance, because as we know, the direct provisions are congregational settings. And also when the government offered the people who were affected, who got unemployment because of the COVID-19, the asylum seekers and refugees were excluded, you know, from the COVID payments. And many organizations and grassroots organizations wrote to the government requesting for an increase, a modest increase of 20 euros, and that was also declined. As we know, currently the asylum seekers and refugees in Ireland are living on 38 euros of weekly allowance. And so even the increase of 20 euros just for the period of the pandemic was then declined. And also there was about 90 healthcare workers who are working in nursing homes, were still living in direct provision. So there were campaigns to move the healthcare workers from direct provision to their own accommodation center, their own accommodation. And about 40 of the healthcare workers have been moved. 15 of them have opted to resign because of childcare and other challenges. Also, you would have seen in the news, there has been 2 accommodation centers, Kahesev and Temple Hotel in Mowat, which had people who were positive, COVID-19 positive.
Yeah.
And there's no, the Department of Justice just kept people there under unsafe conditions. And there was also a campaign requesting for people to be moved to safety where they could self-isolate. And also the pandemic has had a negative impact on the children living in direct provision. Most we know are confined in hotels, in rooms with their families. The schools closing and not going back to school, that has had a negative impact on the general mental health and well-being, because going to school, it means they get to have some level of normality, interacting with other children. Now, because of the pandemic, that has not been the case. Unfortunately, with asylum seekers and refugees in Ireland, we've not had the response from the government So there were a lot of campaign, including the campaign of moving individuals who are vulnerable during the period when they needed to cocoon, because that information wasn't available because the Department of Justice doesn't have a health assessment in place. So they rely on center managers to give them that information in order to be able to move. So we still are intensely campaigning, advocating, and sending in letters. But I must say we've had huge support from yourselves, Kolof, and other organizations and the solicitors requesting for government going forward for direct provision to end and introduce your own door accommodation for those who come in Ireland to seek asylum. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we all have right to seek asylum, and we should all be treated with dignity and respect. And the pandemic has shown that not everyone is treated with that level of dignity and respect, or their human rights being respected. There's a survey which we have shared as well with individuals in direct provision, different direct provision center within Ireland, to find out what are their challenges. And one of the challenges has been resources themselves, worrying about their health, their environment. As many adults and children have been confined in Rome, they're afraid to go out because they're sharing with strangers their spaces. It's not within their control, it's outside their own control. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's certainly very challenging. And I don't know if the current governmental formation discussions in Ireland are, if there's any hope there might be some reform, but we might come back on that. Maybe, Katja, can I come back to you and just ask you, maybe just kind of following up from that, if in terms of migrants self-organizing, refugees in the Balkan states or the countries you're working in, in terms of the priorities, has that shifted a little bit, or have you refocused in terms of self-organization, migrant groups maybe trying to represent themselves a bit more, obviously requiring on support of other groups, but in terms of their own voice being heard?
I can talk only about Slovenia. Migrants do self-organize. Now we have self-organized Eritrean community that is protesting the first negatives. Eritrean refugees received in Slovenia, refugees that came through the Balkan route. Of course, because of the pandemic, all of these procedures were suspended. But now, when the pandemic is for the state officially over, there were the first negative second decisions. So now we will see what for example, this Eritrean community will decide to do in Slovenia. Of course, I must say that many migrants are tired. They want to lead a normal life. They want to have a home, a family. They want to go to work. And they don't want to be some sort of activist, They want a life, a normal life. Not to all the time be protesting,
Can you say that again? Sorry, all the time to be what? To be protesting, to be moving?
Protesting, making a statement.
Oh, making a statement, yeah.
Yeah, it's also...
I understand.
Yeah. People are tired, people are exhausted, nobody is listening to them,
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that, Francis, in terms of, like, is it possible for the people you're working with to speak up for themselves, or is it just like such a challenge, or that they depend on support? Or
yeah, it's a really interesting question, because I think that, I mean, yeah, in northern France there's always been a kind of large displaced community, and there has historically been a lot of collective migrant organising in the different camps. But what we've really seen in recent years, and then particularly during the lockdown, is a really harsh crackdown on any, I mean, even just basic community spaces, community meetings, community living sites. So I think one of the, I guess, well, part of the collateral damage of the harsh police crackdown in the area, which includes very regular evictions of living sites, kind of police aggression, enforced moving of people into different areas of the towns or into different towns altogether. Part of the collateral damage of that is community organising, and the ability for people to have community structures and spaces in which to kind of discuss and collectivise. Recently, at the beginning of the confinement, we saw a lot of frustration on the part of various communities, frustration that they weren't given access to the same rights as local citizens, and that they were stopped from entering on buses and basic things like that. And as a result of the kind of increased frustrations and will to show that to the police present, there was like various incidents with very harsh use of tear gas, and a lot of beatings from the part of police, which is obviously disincentivizes collectivizing, or disincentivizes community-led action, which is really sad to see. Outside of the area, though, there's, I mean, France, there's been some really great migrant-led movements in relation to the regularization of undocumented people across the country, so including north of France, but also in Paris and Marseille and other cities, led by the Gilets Noirs collective, which some of you may know is a kind of migrant-led collective that's begun in Paris but has since spread elsewhere, who's done some amazing organising and held a really large protest last week.
Sorry, can I ask you just to say that again, Francis, because we lost you there for a moment. Just tell us about the organisation based in Paris and the person mentioned. Sorry.
So yeah, it's a collective called the Gilets Noirs, so the black vests, a bit like, it's the kind of takeoff of the yellow vest movement here in France. That have done national-wide organising calling for the regularisation of undocumented migrants and undocumented workers. And last week they organised a nationwide movement calling for the regularisation of undocumented migrants during this time. And so that's, yeah, just to highlight, I guess, the other great work of collectives elsewhere who, yeah, they have community spaces in which to which definitely, yeah, started here in northern France.
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, just to say it's come breaking up a little bit there, but hopefully that'll improve. I just seen on my screen we have, I think, Richard joining us. Is that correct, Richard? Yes. You're welcome. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you guys.
Great, thanks very much for joining us.
No, I'm sorry to be so late.
Not at all. We're just, as you probably gather, we're having a discussion really looking at how grassroots groups across Europe are working on migrant support and refugee issues, or if that's the right term, or just sharing their experiences. And could you, and maybe some of the challenges they face, particularly in light of the COVID-19. Do you want to maybe just tell us a little bit about the organization, Archi Pocorosso, and maybe some of the work you're doing and some of the particular challenges you've possibly encountered in recent months?
Yeah, sure. In a few minutes. I could talk for a long time.
Well, we'll keep you to a few minutes, but yeah.
Yeah, in a few minutes.
No rush, no rush.
Yeah, I'll just quickly explain what our group is and what we do usually, and then maybe I'll try and explain how we've changed what we've done. So we're here in Palermo. We have a a cultural centre and kind of community centre. We have a rented space in the middle of town in a very mixed neighbourhood where it's racially mixed and class mixed. There's a lot of newly arrived migrants who've now more or less settled in the area, as well as people who pass through. And over the past 5 years, we set up a weekly, sometimes daily, migrant drop-in space, where we've responded to changing emergencies. So I think we began when we were really dealing with lots of people newly arriving from boat landings. We then had the kind of emergency situations of lots and lots of young men or teenagers in asylum seeker hostels in the city who needed legal advice and social advice and help confronting the authorities, and occasionally political organizing, which is what we try to do when we can. And I think we've kind of taken this emergency as another moment of reinventing ourselves and dealing with an emergency. We realized kind of quite quickly that actually there were lots of things that we were having to deal with, which at first seemed impossible. And then we thought, well, actually, we've kind of done some of this before. So we found ourselves doing food distribution, which is something we've never wanted to do. And then we remembered that we have done that before at boat landings, at the train station, when there've been large groups of North Africans coming through the city. We found ourselves dealing with helping people access the emergency welfare support from the state and the local council. And that, again, we thought, well, actually, we kind of help people with welfare support usually anyway. So I think we went from the first month of being in panic and not knowing how to do any of this with our space closed down and our group fragmenting. And then I think we kind of realized that we've done this before. We've reinvented ourselves before. We've had to deal with emergencies before. And now slowly, at least here, we're getting back to normal. So our big lockdown has ended. People go out, places are opening, like public squares are packed with people drinking in the evenings. And so today, actually, it was our drop-in day. And we've now got back into the normal swing of people coming in and out and so on. Social distancing has gone to the wind. People have masks, but it's kind of quite relaxed. And now we have to deal with the new social and economic crisis that's hitting. So there are a lot of people who are coming to understand the help that they can get from the state, the kind of welfare support that there is, which isn't much. And also, I'll just leave on this note, there's a new law that's been brought in to help regularize certain migrants who don't have documents. And that's causing means a lot of people need to come and talk to us face to face. Yeah, I'll leave it there. I hope that's explained a bit without taking up too much time.
That's great. And I mean, I don't know if you heard our colleagues, Mavis was talking about the particular challenges for Irish asylum seekers who live in, I don't know if you've heard direct provision, but particularly for children and feeling confined, and also for those who are permitted to work, that it's very difficult, and particular challenges around health and isolation. And Katja was talking about the challenges then in Slovenia, people confined because there's no movement, or there was no movement, borders were very closed, health supports are very poor. I don't know if there's any state supports at all. And then of course things obviously really bad as well in northern France, Calais, and those areas, in terms of people being moved on, or using the state, if you like, using COVID as an excuse almost to break up and displace people further. I don't know if that's been the case in Italy, but I mean, do people get some state supports there, or are they very much dependent on the support of guys like you, organizations that are working in your area?
That depends a lot on people's legal status, which is not necessarily just to do with whether someone has the right to remain, but has come down to an issue which we've brought up a lot in political discussions and is a problem across Italy, which is it's very difficult to have residency, which isn't to do with the right to remain, but it's to do with being registered with the local council. Kind of like if you want to register to vote, you would have to have residency just to show that you officially live in that place. And if you don't have that in Italy, it becomes extremely difficult to access the welfare state. And if you are not Italian, it's quite likely that you don't have residency. I don't have residency, for example. I cannot access the Italian welfare state. And so that ended up being the division, because it means that if you have residency, you can access the tax office, you are computerized, the support can get to you. And so, for example, there's now how would I translate it? An emergency income has been brought in. So if you have residency, you can get between 400 to 800 euros a month for the next 2 months into your bank account, boom, to get liquidity going. But if you don't have residency, you can't get that.
Yeah, maybe I can. Yeah, Richard, that's great. I'm going to just move back over to Mavis, maybe just like in terms of what MASI are demanding at the moment, is there any hope of ending direct provision in Ireland? Have you seen any signals there?
Tom, there's been letters written to the Department of Justice to introduce on-door accommodation and direct provision. As we all know, refugees and asylum seekers are individuals who are very vulnerable. Some came from war-torn countries, some victims of violence, child and human trafficking, basically. So they came with trauma and live in traumatic situations currently in direct provision. We have not had any response from the Department of Justice since COVID-19. When this happened, we had to go into lockdown as Ireland. Letters were sent requesting for your own door accommodation. It is possible right now because we currently closed our borders, so meaning there are no new people coming in to seek asylum. Mm-hmm. We have unprecedented empty units where adults and children can be accommodated to live a normal life. So that is one of the demands, and the main demands, to say you can end direct provision. It's not working. It's been there for 20 years and it's discriminating. It's a form of racism against those who came to seek international protection in Ireland, and it has to come to an end. You've tried it for 20 years. It's not working. And also, people are there longer than a year, more than 5 years, living in direct provision, in inhumane condition, where other people decide on your family life. You do not have autonomy over life. You do not have privacy. You are told when to eat, when not to eat. So at the end of the day, a single procedure process was introduced, and it promised that cases will be processed quicker, within 6 to 12 months, but it has not been happening. The single process procedure was introduced in 2016, started implementation in 2017. Right now, with the new procedure, even just an interview, to get an interview, individual can wait 6 to 9 months just to go in and get an interview. And it even takes longer to get a decision on their own case, because the system itself has failed to process families, individuals, adults and children, even those who are unaccompanied, the minors who are unaccompanied, live under these inhumane conditions. And so our demands was your own door accommodation to be provided to international protection applicants, and also to be part of the Irish community. That way, there's the process of integration and social inclusion is taking place. So we're hoping that when the new government is formed, as there are currently talks in Ireland, that one of the national priorities will be, introducing your own door accommodation. It's possible, it can be done. Let the community, be the ones, a form of reception, as a form of, a reception for those who come in Ireland to seek international protection.
Yeah, let's hope things can be speeded up. Maybe, Katja, if I could just come back to you in terms of just the context in Slovenia. I mean, I'm not familiar, but is that, the state, what's the kind of response there? We hear pretty bad stories, obviously, from Hungary. I don't know what it's like in Slovenia, or in terms of civil society and solidarity groups, the work you do. Is it difficult to get that support of the powers that be, or in Slovenia, is it particularly challenging, or is it a little bit more open, perhaps? In your own work?
Yes, one thing I need to say that the epidemic was put in place in Slovenia on the 12th of March, and on the 13th of March, a new far-right coalition aligned with Orban's Fidesz started its mandate. So we all know what this means. This means that the civil society is being attacked and will be attacked in the future. This is this Hungarian model to show. They cut funding to organizations that provided legal aid to asylum seekers. And it also started to show in a big way in the environmental sector, where environmental issues were taken out of procedures for big infrastructure projects. So, of course, under this far-right atmosphere, our work is in a more precarious position than it was under liberal or.
Yeah, it doesn't sound great. And obviously the rise in xenophobia and right-wing nationalism across Europe is certainly a real worry. Just in terms of maybe putting it back to the panel, just broadening it out from the national context to the European context. I don't know, Francis, if you have any thoughts on the role the EU can play. Is it doing enough in terms of protection of migrants? And has COVID changed the situation there? I mean, particularly I'm thinking maybe it's not your situation, maybe something Richard might want to comment in around rescues in the Mediterranean, but state assistance more generally. Has there been any shift in light of COVID, or any noticeable shift, or is it still something that's evolving? Maybe we could hear from you, Francis, and then I might just come back to Richard on that in terms of EU responses.
Yeah, absolutely.
What role the EU should be playing?
Mm-hmm. I'm happy to leave Richard to talk about a lot of it, since we do kind of limited work at the EU level. But certainly throughout the period, I think, as I was saying before, similarly to prior to COVID, there's generally quite a lack of will from the part of EU authorities to engage in the situation in northern France. I think because it's seen as kind of highly politicized and has been tried to kind of be presented as a purely French domestic issue. So there's been attempts prior to this, and also during the lockdown or during COVID-19, to engage, for example, the European Asylum Support Office and MEPs to try and kind of make statements and bring attention to the situation. But there's very, very limited response now and previously. I think in terms of probably one of the biggest kind of policy shifts or governmental shifts that we've seen is actually from the UK. In relation to Brexit and its relationship with Europe, which is new proposals. I mean, some of you might have seen kind of in the UK media a rise in attention relating to channel crossing. So people now trying kind of via rubber dinghy or small boats to cross the channel to reach the UK from northern France. In response to this, there's been a kind of big statement from the Home Office saying that they're hoping to rework the current EU Dublin agreement post-Brexit into an agreement that basically allows easily for people arriving from France, we assume also arriving from elsewhere, facilitate easy return. So basically bypass what would currently be the Dublin agreement. And we've also seen them seeking advice from Australia on this issue. So following Australia's kind of boat operations for people previously arriving by boat and then being sent to detention centres on offshore islands. So that's the kind of overarching policy response that we've seen relating to the border. But yeah, I'm sure Richard will have more to say on specifically EU response.
Do you want to come in on that, Richard? I think you need to turn on your mic, Richard, or Mark, can you turn on the mic?
It's interesting to hear what you say about France, because I think, again, here, our impression is the EU feels very absent from migrant response as well. Although EU discussions have been very, very present outside of migration in terms of Italian politics, become again the forefront of how to create a welfare state response. But in terms of new arrivals by sea, there was a very strange decision by the Italian government to declare Italian ports as no longer ports of safety because Italy is hit by the pandemic. A decision which of course makes no sense because it's a pandemic. So that means there are no ports of safety anywhere, which means all ports of safety become the same, right? But in many ways that just continues with Italy's usual response of coming up with emergency laws to shut down ports, block the landings, and so on. And as always, the landings have continued anyway. Sea rescue missions are continuing. There are various rescue missions that are out at sea. And there are also quite a lot of direct landings. So mainly from Tunisia, of boats of North Africans coming in directly to Lampedusa without being intercepted by Coast Guard or rescue missions. And that's continued. That's continued quite consistently.
And in terms of the far right, we heard from our colleagues there in Slovenia. Has that been a concern for you guys in Italy? Or is it always in the background, bubbling in the background, I guess? Or have you noticed any change?
In terms, I think the far right...
In work in Palermo, maybe it's not so much of an issue, is it?
It's a good question, actually. I think the answer is probably that on a national level, the far right is trying to recompose itself in reaction to the fact that there is a officially center leftist government. But the government is quite popular at the moment, so I don't think it's working. In terms, I think what's probably more interesting is that there has been an increase, certainly in Palermo, of racism and violent racism. Partly because with the lockdown, I think a lot of the kind of the watchdogs aren't there. So the associations, the churches, the kind of positive social forces that might be present to ease out tensions, or where people can go to with problems, have had to pull back. Mm-hmm. And I think that has often meant that tensions which maybe are kept at bay have instead have come out. So we hope that now with the lockdown gone, things can, maybe we can get back to some of the kind of dynamics that we had before. But of course, there's a situation now of even more unemployment and so on, and that's not going to help.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of migrants maybe would depend on informal sector work to get by, and that's been cut off for a lot of them, I guess.
It's a lot of, I mean, work's been cut off across the board. In terms of that, I think that what's happened with the document amnesty that's coming in is important and interesting at a European level, because the amnesty that's being brought in is only for people working in cleaning, personal care workers and agriculture. So you have to find a job in those sectors in order to get a document, which completely reinforces the racialized division of labor in Italy. And just to give one anecdotal example, which I think is very telling and says that the kind of transformation that might happen because of this, is we met an Arab man who had left his job in a factory, a job without documents, without contract, in a factory in the north of Italy, and has come to the south of Italy to search for a job in the countryside on the farms. So he's left his factory job because his only way of getting documents is to enter into a different sector. So this new law, instead of really being an amnesty, it reinforces those divisions, which is very sad.
Yeah. So maybe just conscious of the time as well. And Mark, I don't know if there's any questions coming in from listeners from outside or people who are listening in, but if I could maybe just quickly ask each of you, in terms of your organizational work, if you see, you know, kind of scope for networking or solidarity in practice. You mentioned, Francis, in France, you know, there are networks. We know in Ireland, there's different groups trying to, how important it is, or, you know, for people, for particularly the grassroots groups like a lot of you are involved in, to keep in touch and learn from each other, or what kind of supports you might need, or how that might work. Does that question make sense? In terms of, I suppose, solidarity in practice, you know, rather than just working alone, how can you work with others, or what could help, particularly for, you know, support groups or different groups to be allied with migrant and campaigns and so on. Does that make sense? Anybody want to come in on that? Mavis, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, it does make sense.
That you don't feel alone, if you like.
It does make sense because solidarity is very important to fight injustice. We have seen during this pandemic huge amount of support from different organizations, from individuals. Like I did say earlier on, that more than 70 lawyers wrote, and organizations wrote to the government requesting for your own door accommodation for those who came in Ireland to seek asylum. There's a call to respect human rights of everyone, including those who are refugee. Doesn't mean you are a refugee, you are less of a human, or that COVID-19 would not kill you. There has not been transparency in terms of people, how many people are positive in these centers, and specific centers that had clusters. But when I follow the social media, I advocate myself on social media together with the movement of Asylum Seekers, the Irish Refugee Council. You know, the ombudsperson for children has also spoken out and said that direct provision is not a place for both adults and children, especially the children. So that network, as it grows in solidarity, all of us, we are speaking with one voice. That's how systems that have not worked are then ended, and then you introduce systems that will respect human rights, because seeking asylum is a human right. And if a country finds itself right now able to receive refugees, it doesn't mean situation will not change. We may not, Ireland, be refugees now, doesn't mean that tomorrow things, did we know right now we've been locked down, we'll be working remotely? Nobody knew. Therefore, situation do change. We have an opportunity as human beings as government, to respect human rights and support each other. So that solidarity has been amazing throughout the lockdown. We have been speaking in one voice, saying the same thing. And for me and for the movement to see that backing from different organizations and individuals has been truly amazing in Ireland, which says that it's only a few perhaps who are still in support of the current direct provision system, but the masses are calling to an end to it, and that pressure is mounting. So, it's mounting is enough that I feel truly with the new government we'll see an end to direct provision and a system that respects human rights. So thank you.
Thank you. That's encouraging. Yeah. Francis, I don't know if you want to come in on that, just that issue around solidarity or working collectively with other groups, mobilizing for change. Can I make a difference, or is it a struggle?
Yeah, I think we would absolutely echo what Mavis has said, because it is a human rights issue and it does require all of us as Europeans, as global citizens, to see it as a problem. And I think one of the issues in Ireland system is extremely problematic, but you're also not dealing with the same level. As Irish people, we're not dealing with the same level of mass scale migration and displacement as there is in many other European countries. And I think but we are Europeans, and that makes it particularly important that we see it as our problem as well. So what's happening in France is not, or Slovenia or Italy, it's not separate from us, it's all of our problems together. And I think a real change of attitude is what's needed to both improve the situation in Ireland, but also across Europe.
Great. And Katja, and maybe specifically Katja and Richard, is in terms of, say, listeners here in Ireland, members of COLOB and other groups who are listening in and to this live stream, is there ways that we could perhaps offer support, even if it's a matter of making small donations or something? I don't know if that would make a difference to your projects, because if there is, we can share those links later through the COLOB website. We can put them up. I don't know, would that make a difference to you guys? Yes. Or is there any other ways that we can offer support apart from our solidarity?
Solidarity, even basic humanitarian solidarity, is extremely important. Now during the COVID, when all of the borders were shut, volunteers were not able to get into Bosnia, into the camps, and there was a lack of things, basic things, soap. Every winter we transport coats to Bosnia because people freeze. There are amputations because people do not have shoes. Shoes are extremely important. And we strongly rely on solidarity from the people, from other organizations. But what needs to be done on European level is structural political change. That is what needs to happen.
Yeah, long-term solutions. But you're saying there is scope for some practical support as well, can make a difference, particularly in the winter months. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but obviously, clearly, long-term solutions, structural and political change are needed, and that's where the real struggle is. Maybe Richard or Francis, I don't know if there's any kind of support we guys can offer you apart from our solidarity, or if there's advocacy work or whatever you think that could be done or is going on.
I just wanted to say briefly that I think in this period actually we've seen how in our situation donations really have only gone so far. Like the humanitarian work found its funding, and it also found it through the government. We managed to get the local council to make very big donations of central funds and so on, although we had to go and actually bring the food bags to the people. We managed to get that money out of the government. I think I think what will be useful is to get people to keep their eyes on the Mediterranean and to know what's going on and know that Libya is still in a civil war, people are still using the Libyan route, and people are still arriving, and that hasn't finished. And I think we felt that very strongly over the past few days with the extraordinary situation in the United States. A lot of my African friends here in Palermo have said to me, okay, everyone's saying Black Lives Matter.
You've frozen there for the moment. Francis, do you want to come in on that? While I've lost Richard temporarily, but can you hear us? Yeah.
Yeah. Alana, I think you might be best.
Or Alana, thank you very much, Alana. Yeah.
Yeah. No, well, we're a small grassroots organisation and staffed by volunteers. So any sort of financial support that people can give is extremely appreciated. It goes directly to the people that we support. But then also any kind of like help that you can give us for advocacy work. So we frequently on social media post links to the documents that we're working on, and signatures are always really important, and sharing to raise awareness of the situation here.
Sure. So what we might do is, well, Mark might at the end just say he'll be able to share some of your maybe websites, or if there are, you know, crowdfunding type links that we can pass on certainly to people listening in. But obviously, as Richard and Katja have both highlighted, you know, that this requires longer term solutions and keeping the focus particularly on the Mediterranean, which is so appalling. And just, we know the media is always moving on, and doesn't mean these things haven't gone away. And the same in northern France and everywhere else. Mark, I'm just wondering, in terms of time, had you any questions you'd like to ask yourself, or if there's anybody out there who is asking questions that you want to pass on? I've just been reminded here by Mark to ask MASI, is there any kind of support we can offer you, MASI, in terms of your priorities right now?
Yes, support that.
Can you speak a little bit louder, please?
Oh, okay. How is it now? Okay. Can you hear me now, Tom?
Yeah, that's great. All good.
Great. Yes, we do need support. The most important thing has been food for most families while you are in lockdown. As we know, the weekly allowance isn't that much. So it's to support the initiative like the one that I started, which is Cooking for Freedom. Cooking for Freedom has been supporting families to be able to buy the food, especially with children being at home. And also, as the movement of asylum seekers, we will still be in touch in different areas and departments that we may need your expertise on how to approach different campaigns that we are in. And we hope that you continue to share as well the campaigns that are there on the social media, so that our voice can be heard all over Ireland, if not the entire world, with a hope to see change in the current situation. Yeah. So because now I'm one of the speakers, I'm unable to share any links. Perhaps after then I could share links with Mark via email or on your social media sites.
That's good. So any final thoughts, because I'm going to bring this to a close fairly soon, but any final thoughts maybe from the panel on what they've heard from other people, if they'd like to just come in, if they feel that they forgot to say or would like to share? I see Richard's gone AWOL temporarily, but anyway, anyone like to share anything else on what they've heard, or like to, otherwise I'll be thanking everybody.
I would just like to say that the George Floyd protests, that we must be very aware that at least in the Balkan route is full victims of police violence, of police brutality. People die from this in a direct and an indirect way, and that we should really, really pay close attention to what the European Union is doing at its borders and what its relationship to migration and to migrants. And it needs to be said that Black Lives Matter and migrants' lives matter as well. It is enough of this dying everywhere. Enough.
Yeah, I think if I could just pick up on that really quickly. I totally agree, and I think seeing the kind of wider issue of lack of access, denial of access to rights for migrants or displaced populations across Europe as a political problem. And although across throughout the COVID-19 period, there's obviously been a really big focus. I mean, as I've been speaking about on really basic kind of humanitarian aid and a humanitarian approach to the situation of just allowing people to have basic social distancing measures, access to water, access to hygiene, which is really important. I think the kind of really big kind of crisis discourse around COVID-19 has sometimes been used by governments to shield or kind of wave through much more hostile laws, which concretize this idea of kind of protected and protected from, or protected against, and the division between communities, as we're seeing kind of not just in the US, but elsewhere as well. I think recently, this last week, we've had a really strong example of it in the UK response, as I was mentioning, to people crossing by boats, which is draconian crackdown basically on people's right to access asylum by basically encouraging pushbacks or allowing pushbacks in the Channel, which is happening in the Mediterranean too, and obviously other external borders, as Katja was saying. So I think throughout the COVID-19 kind of crisis and discourse, keeping an eye on what's happening, what's being pushed through underneath that, I think is what has kind of encouraged everyone to do, and what we're trying to do as well in our work.
I think those are really important messages, and really thanks for that. So I think what remains for me really just to thank everybody again, which is a really incredibly interesting discussion, and despite the challenges, just to commend you on the work you're doing, and we really hope things will get better, and there'll be a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but all working in your own ways. It's been an incredible journey, and not forgetting the challenges that the people you're working with, most of all, to keep the eye on the ball, as you say, wherever it's happening, and because the media is so fickle, but just alternative channels like this. And I suppose thanks to Kolov for facilitating this, and thank you to the listeners for tuning in. And if you can to subscribe or like this YouTube channel, that would be great. I might just hand back to Mark, but just from my end, I just want to thank once again Mavis from MASI here in Ireland, Francis and Alana, who are in France with Refugee Women's Centre, Katja, who is tuning in from Slovenia, and Richard, who may be still out there somewhere. I don't see his picture, but I think he's still out there. Oh, he's back again. Welcome, Richard. Just to say thanks, everybody. Really fantastic. And Mark, do you want to say any final comments before I sign off?
No, it's fine. I'm just gonna end the stream now. Again, from Kolov, I guess, just really like to thank you all for taking part. Sorry, Richard, we didn't get a long time with you, but we can possibly come back to this conversation again. But we really appreciate it from Kolov, and thanks very much.
Okay, cheerio, everybody. Good luck.